Hey guys, GhazzyTV here with another Path of Exile build guide. In this one, we're going to be talking about the Holy Relic build, which is something I've been fiddling around a lot with. Been talking with Creparian about this build for quite some time and decided to actually give it a go and try it out during 3.17. Did some finalized testing the other day, and today we're going to make the actual build guide for it. This is played as a Necromancer, and it's all about combining your actual hit rate with your hitting attack, combined with the cooldown recovery of the Holy Relic. I'll talk about this in detail, and of course, there will be a written build guide linked in the descriptions below as soon as the written guide is done for this build. The build itself is, in my opinion, one of the most efficient build on the low budget end. Basically, it's something I refer to a lot when I talk about build guides and builds in general, and that is efficiency per currency invested. Basically, the Holy Relic can deliver a ton of damage as well as pack an insane survivability with almost no currency invested whatsoever. However, Holy Relic has a tendency of only ramping up their defense excessively with more currency invested, whilst their DPS doesn't really get that much when you invest more currency to it. I did try to push this build into a very high budget state, but it honestly felt kind of lackluster for the super high endgame. Needless to say though, this build is very comfortable to clear with, as well as doing endgame bosses even on a low budget end. Now in the gameplay footage you'll be watching whilst I'm talking about this build, you're going to see that this build can do Cortex even when wearing something like a Tabula and absolute trash gear. I'll show you the gear I was using during the showcase of that, in which you can see me actually killing Cortex despite taking a few deaths during the actual boss fight. I have done it flawless with this type of gear as well. However, it is not super easy to do with this level of gear. A little bit more investment, especially on the defensive front, because you're going to take some hits during that fight, which will make you able to do the fight with very low currency invested. In my opinion, not the most comfortable for it, but it's among the cheapest builds you can do to actually be able to do that level of content. When it comes to invitations, not the most comfortable again. The biggest problem is actually your Holy Relic minions dying every now and then, which can be a bit annoying. But before we dive into the guide, I do want to show you the actual gear I've been using in the gameplay footage you'll be seeing. And obviously the first item is the weapon. We're going to use a melee weapon so we can use an attack. In this case, we are using a melee weapon dropped from Alva Incursion Temples, which has the minion damage, and a minion deals double damage with an open suffix for a trigger craft. Everything else is literally whatever. In this case, we were able to get some resistances on it, which is pretty nice. The only real mandatory item for this build is a Joffrey's Crest to make sure that you get that extra summon Holy Relic, so you can have two of these bad boys. Other than that, doesn't really matter. The Holy Relic enchant for AoE can be a bit expensive. It is obviously not needed, but does help make clearing a little bit smoother. We're using Ashes of the Stars, obviously, oiling up Testudo for more defense. We're using Generic Ring with life and resistances. We're using a Tabula Rasa. This one is corrupted with +1 aura gems, however, +2 aura gems. However, we're not using any aura gems, so this is just a clean out Tabula Rasa in the gameplay footage. We are using another unset ring. In this case, we did bench some reduction to the mana cost. Not really needed, but again, just life and resistances. The gloves, if you can get yourself something mini damage implicit pair of gloves, the spell suppression doesn't matter because we barely have anything of that in this build. However, you can essence craft the minion damage through the use of Essence of Fear and just settle with any life roll and resistances. If I ended up with 2 rest rolls, I would just bench craft a life, or vice versa. In this case, I benched the resistances. We're using Darkness and Throne with generic life and dexterity or life and minion damage tools in both slots. Same goes for the gear. We're using a generic Quicksilver, some defensive flask, and an instant life flask, which is not instant because I actually took the wrong flask, but you're supposed to have an instant life flask. And the boots is, again, brittle ground on while moving is one of the best modifiers you can have. I have the worst version. It's actually easier if you have a little bit higher duration than 2 seconds. But again, if you are able to get dexterity, that's nice because you're going to need that. You can get that on rings as well. And other than that, it's just movement speed, life, and resistances. So it kind of sums up the gear. Tree wise, I'll talk about that in a bit, but the jewels I was using in this build is only this one. It's a life and a little bit of damage jewel. As you can see, this character is level 100, but I have 13 points left over, which simulates a level 87 character with 30 plus dexterity spec. So essentially, this is a level 86 character, and we were able to somewhat comfortably, not entirely comfortable, run tier 16 maps, since you're lacking quite a bit of efficiency with this build, with the lack of levels for tier 16 content. You were able to do it on a league start scenario, but you're gonna risk having your specters die. Other than that, it's really comfortable to play. Super tons of good layers of defense, and really smooth. There are 2 different variations to this build. Obviously, there will be descriptions in the guide for both, and also in the PUB, you'll see some descriptions of both of these approaches. And when I say 2 different variations, I'm talking about using Static Strike versus using Cyclone. Now, there are two things to think about. One is to make sure that your hit rate is around the same as your cooldown recovery for your Holy Relic, because when you hit something, your Holy Relic will pulse with damage, and that's how you deal damage. Static Strike allows you to hit once and then have beams consistently shoot out from you, allowing you to not need to hit out all the time and just run through packs, which I think is very comfortable. Whereas Cyclone allows you to consistently be spinning around enemies and also make use of the brittle ground on move dropping effect, which allows you to consistently get this debuff up on enemies as you're hitting them. The problem is, if you stop at any given time to start looting, you're going to start taking damage and you have no damage output. That's why I prefer the Static Strike. However, if you do decide to run this, you're going to need a Phantasmal Static Strike, the alternative quality. They are very cheap. There's a reason this quality is lowered, and that is to make sure it adds up to the CDR of the build. And I think this one actually has a little bit too much quality actually for this, because I took the gem from my high budget version of this that I tested with. So before I show you the tankiness, I want to show you the POB. There are no cluster jewels available at all. The POB is designed for level 92. If you're lower level, like I did with the character in-game that you saw the gameplay footage with, just simply remove the jewel slots and you'll get there. The defensive layer is completely designed to be around the use of block and life recovering block, as well as divine shield. The gear, like I mentioned, is using a life on block shield. This is the most expensive item of the entire gear set for this character. It's a Shaper or Crusader influence, or even a synthesized base that you can get this on. In League Start scenarios, you'll have to pay between 50 and 100 chaos. This will be the highest upgrade that you'll get for your low budget approach to the build, and is something you're going to want for the super high tier maps such as red tier or higher. Outside of that, you don't really need it for the content that is up to yellow tiers, so this makes it a very good League Starter build. Other than that, the POB goes through all the masteries that you need and the block and everything. Do make sure that you cap your resistances, of course, and if you're able to get some chaos rest, that's very, very attractive. So basically, when I talk about hit rate, you have to spec out into resolute techniques to make sure that your hits cannot be evaded. They will always hit. And what we're looking for is looking at our attack. In this case, we have the beams from the Static Strike having a hit rate of 4.3 per second. So that's 4.3 hits per second. On top of this, you then go to the calculation tab and look at Holy Relic with checking the minion stats box here. And you'll see the trigger rate cap is 4.33. This allows me to be as close as possible to this cap, allowing me to maximize the actual damage output with my hits. So every hit I do will always trigger a Nova. However, if you are running something like Cyclone, for example, as you can see here, by me enabling these things, you can see that the hit rate will be 5.51, which means I'm basically hitting more times than I can trigger, which is fine. You don't have to balance this perfectly on a lower budget end. Just make sure that you have at least around the same or higher. Don't be far below, because that will significantly lower your DPS output. As you can see here, the DPS display in POB actually went up because of this. If I turn this off, it'll go down, and that's something you need to keep in mind. So if we look at the Static Strike, for example, I'll ramp this up to the 18% quality. This should be better for this approach. However, for some reason, this is not actually calculating the trigger rates of my Static Strike, which is really weird. But if I enable Cyclone, suddenly you see the DPS. The DPS is a little bit wonky to look at when it comes to the POB. So before I show you the tankiness, I'll talk about the gem links and everything and how you progress this kind of gear and how you level it. So the Holy Relics that you want to run with is only going to be achieved when you have a Joffrey's Crest. Don't bother using Holy Relic prior to this. And we're going to use Holy Relic, and if you can get one with Divergent, that would be great. They're not very expensive. Very few people play this build. Minion damage, of course. Predator can be used at all times. Increased critical strike damage, brutality, and meat shield. If you're going higher budget, you can go for things like Empower and stuff like that instead. And this is calculated with a level 20 Divergent instead of a 21 like I normally do, because Divergent, you don't want to take the risk if it's too expensive to try to get a 21 out of it, and then you might end up with a 20. So to keep this realistic, I'm showing you a level 20 Holy Relic. Trigger-wise, which you're going to have in the weapon, make sure that Desecrate doesn't really matter if that's linked to Life Tap or not, but your Bone Offering will need to be linked to a Life Tap, so that your your Bone Offering will cost life instead of mana. This is to ease up on the mana pressure. So if I hover over the Bone Offering, it's going to cost me 217 life, which I can show you by casting it like this. You'll see it happens there. But my defensive stats is telling me that our life regen is 272, and with a Stone Golem, we're regenerating almost 400 life per second. Other than that, in this case, we're using Static Strike, which is supposed to have life gain on hit, which I currently do not have it linked in this game, because I'm going to show you how it works without it. You can have Static Strike, life gain on hit with an Assassin's Mark. If you're running the Cyclone setup, you would simply just switch to Static Strike for Cyclone. Very, very simple. You don't need faster attacks in there. The auras, which we're linking in their helmet, is a Pride of Determination, Tempest Shield, and Defiance Banner. Obviously, something like an a Divergent will be better for higher chance to block spells, because we want to have to make sure that we have 75/75 on our block cap at all times with Bone Offering running. Utility Minions is an Animate Guardian, which I've not been using in any of the gameplay footage you've seen, which means that we can dish out a ton more damage, as well as having better defense through fortification stacks that you get from the Kingmaker Axe for the Animate Guardian. Decided to show you guys without it, since a lot of people don't want to invest currency into it early on in the league start, so I wanted to simulate that. Raise Zombie, also another layer of defense that is not being used in the guide, because in the gameplay footage, sorry. This is to for me to double check the actual survivability of it. This will obviously help you keep your Holy Relics minions alive during the harder content, which is one of the problems we encountered when we saw in the gameplay footage. But Raise Zombie is very important, keeping them alive. Raise Spectre, we're going to use 2 Carnage Chieftains and 1 Host Chieftain to generate as much buffs for them as possible. And then obviously Minion Life to keep these guys alive. We're using a leap slab with fast attacks to keep our minions, or sorry, to keep our mobility on flow, but also to get fast attacks for our stone golem that is going to proc Feeding Frenzy. So this is going to proc on that very fast and effective for you. And then 2 Unset Ring for Convocation, as well as Ancestral Cry. Now, the thing is with 2 Unset Rings, and why I took away the life gain on hit, is to show you that you don't necessarily need that to be played, because you're able to skip that and use that socket instead of one of these Unset Rings early in the league. You can switch the Ancestor Cry, which is just a really nice bonus for you to hit something with your beams for the Static Strike. And you don't really need it. You can switch this for something like a Vol Molten Shell for better layers of defense yet again. Other than that, the tree when it comes to defense is like talking about with the masteries. Obviously, we have the RMR one. We have increased crit. We have increased effective offering down here. We have Determination Armor. We got the increased block chance per 5% chance to block on the shield. We also have the Minions Leech 1% to keep them a little bit steady, as well as 50+ life. I didn't take the 10% life because I decided I didn't need that. I would rather have the regen that I would lose if I spectated. I'm not sure if that's the best choice or not, but that's how I ran the build. And obviously in the block mastery over here, we're using 20 life and mana gained on block. The mana is not really super important, but the life is actually quite noticeable together with the life percent on block that we have. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you what happens in a map mod that you really don't want to play. And that is the defensive layer of this build when you're doing something that has a reduced chance to block, which is the last modifier in this map. So I'm going to show you this map and take away my relic. And I will show you how bad the survivability actually gets because of this modifier. It's something you want to stay away from. So I'll start the Bone Offering, and I'm just going to find a couple of packs to sit in. I think this is fine. And you can see that the build is, despite this, rather tanky, but I will die inevitably at any second at this point. And this is because I don't have enough block to reliably make sure that I block enough attacks to sustain my EHP. So it's enough to get a small unlucky streak and it will immediately kill me. You can already see that I'm dropping down pretty low and eventually we will die. So that's one of the bad mods you can run. The cool thing with this build when it comes to tankiness is, in fact, when you don't have that modifier, you're not immortal. Far from it. You're still able to die, and we'll see if we do die. This map modifier has increased physical damage as extra cold, and that's about it. So it's not too rippy, but this doesn't mean that you're entirely safe. You will still eventually die with this. However, your survivability is significantly better than it was without the block, because now we can reliably sustain ourselves. Our block will recover us very, very effectively, even versus chaos damage monsters. So here's a blue pack. So let's just sit here and see how this feels. So eventually we're going to die, especially versus chaos damage. We're going to be hit here with some chaos damage. So inevitably I will die, but as you can see, the sustain is keeping me safe. The risk here dying will be from these chaos guys, and I'm going to show you this in one more run because these guys doing a lot of chaos damage. And right now my chaos resistance is 35%, so the reason we're dropping low is because of chaos damage. But as you can see, the enemies almost died because of my Tempest Shield alone, which is pretty crazy actually. So I'm going to do this one more time and show you without having a bunch of chaos damage monsters smacking our asses. If I can find that in this map. There's a lot of chaos. Okay, here's some physical damage dealings. Let's see if we can actually get that HP back up. All right, so this should be fine for the most part. There's a little bit of chaos there, chaos pool, but as you can see, the build is literally just sitting here. I will die. It's just a matter of time. If I get unlucky streak, I will die. But the fact that the build can easily sit and do this shows how tanky the build is. Obviously, there still is a risk that I'll die. Let's get rid of that golem. Where is he? There he is. As you can see, the build is just sitting here. There's a little bit of chaos damage. There's chaos on the pool ground here. Caustic ground is hurting me a little bit because of my low chaos rest, but the survivability is very steady. And this is on the super low budget version. Something that's going to keep us alive better later on is when we get better energy shield on the higher budget version, which will allow our divine shield to ramp up that extra layer of defense. In our case, we only have 157 energy shield. However, the gear, depending on how effective you play it and how effective you're able to get the gear like this is very easily achievable on day one. It's nothing special. It really isn't special. The weapon, you can get that for maybe 5 up to 10 chaos, a couple chaos for the crest. I think around 50, maybe up to 100 chaos for the shield, which is your high budget item for your low budget build. Ashes is of course really expensive early on. You don't really need this. This is only to increase your DPS output, so the tankiness I showed you, no problems. Killing Eater, World Searing Exarch, no problems. Killing Cortex on a low budget build, you're gonna need a little bit better gear than I have. Was able to do it, but I still recommend better gear to survive better. And Ashes will be one of the best upgrades you can get after the shield is secured. So that's kind of the approach you want to look into, and the flask, I would strongly recommend trying to get Transgressor or Flagellant flasks. They will automatically be refilling because you're going to take a lot of hits either way. And then popping that used when charges reach full from the instilling orbs will allow you to basically have them as a cheap, poor man's mage blood to automatically apply for you. But that's basically all I have for you with this video. Hope you guys enjoyed the build guide. It's a little bit of a quick, short format, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe for more content. And if you want to check the written guide, it's going to be linked in the descriptions below as soon as it's done. And if you're watching this video long after it's been posted, there's a risk that this video might be outdated. Make sure you check the written guide. That will always be updated for every league coming. All right, till next time, boys. As always, stay safe and keep rocking. Short video, 18 fucking minutes.